Hello, my name is Michael Dewan Herrick. I'm a psychotherapist and a life coach in private practice in London. This is the 10th video in my series under the title Questioning Woke Psychotherapy. In this video, I'll share my thoughts about what I think is the root mistake, the fundamental error in thinking at the bottom of critical social justice theory and the various forms of Marxism that we see today. This doesn't apply only to psychotherapy. I think it applies to all of the ways that we see this show up in our lives. This one mistake, I think, is what allows the crazy theories to proliferate all around us and to gain such a purchase on the minds of so many. I'm not passing along something that I read someplace. This is my own observation. I haven't been able to find anybody stated exactly the way I have. So if you're aware of someplace else that these ideas are being presented, then let me know. Leave me a comment. I'd be very curious to find it. But in order to do that, you'll have to listen to the whole video. This root mistake, as I'm calling it, is really pretty simple and obvious once you see it, but it takes a couple steps in order to describe it. But let's start here with the fact that critical social justice theory and Marxism, with its endless preoccupation with oppressive social structures, puts the blame for human suffering on those oppressive systems and believes that if it can dismantle and do away with them, it will be able to usher in a utopian reality. What it doesn't contend with, what it doesn't say much, if anything, about, is the fundamental existential challenges of life itself and of human life in particular. So let's start with a question. What is it that we need to do in order to meet our fundamental needs? From Maslow's hierarchy, I don't think we need to have Maslow to tell us this, but we have needs, physiological needs for food and water and shelter. We have safety needs so that we're free from dangers. So how do we get those needs met? We're a social species, right? And the way we get those met is that we come together in groups and have a feeling of cohesion and cooperation. Maslow's third need on his hierarchy is belongingness needs, but I think that these are really more fundamental, that they start at day one. Really, any baby that's abandoned is not going to survive very long, so we have to be part of the group from day one, even if it's only our own family. But our own family is only going to survive in relation to the larger social network. So far, none of this should be controversial. I'm going to assume that it sounds like the facts of human life. This is just the way it is. So let's ask, what is it that any social group needs to do in order to meet the survival needs of its members? How does a social group establish a sense of cohesion and cooperation toward the end of promoting our survival? My undergraduate studies in cultural anthropology were basically an exploration of that. What various cultures throughout the world and throughout time have done to answer those needs. And I've written down a list of questions that I think each culture, each group, in order to come together, needs to develop some kind of answer to these questions. Some of them are related, connected to each other, but I'm just going to list them off here. Who are we, and how did we get here? What do we believe? What is normal? What do we want to be normal? What values do we share? What is morally good and what is morally bad? How should we behave? Who should do what? In other words, what roles are there that need to be fulfilled for this group to hang together? What is acceptable and unacceptable? How do we make decisions that impact all of us? Who has authority? And importantly, how do we transmit and enforce our answers to all of these other questions? There are, of course, other questions that every group has to ask and answer, but I think these are some of the most fundamental questions that we collectively need to answer, whatever culture we're in, and that if we fail to do this, or if we don't, by and large, collectively subscribe to the answers, then I don't think that we can establish a sense of cohesion or collaboration, and as a group, we'll begin to fall apart and not be able to function effectively to meet survival needs. So a well-functioning social group has to establish a sense of shared beliefs, values, rules, laws, roles, individuated roles that are to be fulfilled, and establish a meta-narrative or a mythology or a religion or some kind of shared story that everybody is aware of and identifies with. Furthermore, most groups, and especially now at the level of nation states, are organized hierarchically. In other words, there are some people who are given the responsibility and the power to make decisions that impact the entire group. And that's part of holding the group together. It's hard to imagine a nation state being able to function without a sense of hierarchy. In essence, in order to hold together collectively, the group imposes some constraints on individual freedoms, and it also imposes some burdens of responsibility on individuals toward the well-being of the group. It transmits and enforces this one way or another and has ways to get its members to conform to the answers generated to the questions that were posed earlier. It has ways to socialize and enculturate its members. Depending on how it's answered those questions, it'll be different, but each culture will do that one way or another. Okay, so here's the root mistake, in essence. Critical social justice theory and Marxism rightly observes that there are oppressive hierarchies, social hierarchies, that do excessively and unnecessarily restrict human rights and oppress certain groups. This is true. What it fails to recognize is that every group, in order to be a group and to function well, has to have all these things I've named: shared norms and values and beliefs, and a meta-narrative and a hierarchy, that this is part and parcel of being a group that functions. Wokism seems to blame all human suffering on oppression and goes indiscriminately after anything that smells like oppression, looking to dismantle and destroy it and get rid of it so that it can usher in its utopia. Anything normative has to go. Meta-narratives have to go. Roles have to go. Authority hierarchies have to go. Conformity of any kind has to go. Moral relativism should undo any collective understanding of right and wrong, because it fails to recognize the more existential sources of human suffering and attributes everything to oppression. It feels morally and intellectually justified in going after and tearing down anything that looks like oppression, meanwhile holding a vague utopian vision for what will magically appear once it's done its work. Frankly, to me, it seems like an impetuous child who is angry and frustrated with its parents for imposing any restrictions on its freedom and giving it chores to do, and that it believes that one day when I'm an adult, I'll just do whatever I want. Right. When we become adults, we realize that that's not what being an adult means. Its mistake is not that it recognizes oppressive social structures and systems. Its mistake is in not recognizing what it takes for any social system to exist and not being more discerning about what it criticizes, dismantles, and destroys. Because the liberal democracies of the West have an imperfect history and are still yet imperfect in delivering on universal human rights, they're to be attacked, criticized, dissected, and left to bleed out on the examining table. Meanwhile, as a group themselves, being held together by everything that holds any other group together, they've become just as oppressive as they claim their targets to be. And it seems utterly overlooked by them that they're allowed the freedom to do this within a system that is going out of its way not to be oppressive, no matter what. Did the 20th century not make it abundantly clear that when we divide the world into oppressed and oppressors, and we seek out governments that can enforce equity across the board, what we don't get is an end of oppression. What we get are countless dead bodies and no end of oppression. What we get is an equally applied oppression, except, of course, for the elite at the top. What we also don't get is anything that most of us would recognize as utopia. I believe our collective challenge is to come up with a creative, dynamic tension between individual freedoms and rights and the responsibilities that individuals have toward the group to ensure its ability to meet our survival needs. We need to be able to recognize, challenge, and change oppressive social systems when they unnecessarily, excessively deny individual human rights and freedoms, but we need to do this like a brain surgeon removing a tumor from a brain. I think this is an apt metaphor. Brains are considered to be the most complex thing in the known universe, and social groups are collections of brains in interaction with each other, so arguably even a more complex system, a more complex thing. And both the brain and social systems evolved over eons of time through endless trial and error, endless adaptive strategies to promote life, to get the next generation up and running. It's been quite a long journey. Do we really want to toss out our entire cultural heritage, the hard-won adaptive strategies that have been passed down to us by countless generations? Is there nothing within the Western culture that we would like to preserve? Really? Is it all just colonialism, slavery, white supremacy, and so on? To me, wokism is like a brain surgeon who cuts into the skull and looks down and sees the tumor. And he says, or she says, "Never mind the scalpel, hand me a trowel." To me, this metaphorically illustrates the mistake, the diagnostic mistake, and the mistaken treatment recommendation of wokism. To pick just one example of how this plays out with a particular set of issues, let's consider that all cultures make some kind of decision about what men and women are, what they're supposed to do in order to reproduce and create the next generation for the culture, and how to further the norms and institutions of that culture. This has been called a patriarchy. This has been called an oppressive system, but I would propose that it's not an oppressive patriarchy. What it is a socially adaptive strategy to reproduce individuals and reproduce the culture, and that it's not oppressing any more oppressive of women than it is of men. It's simply what we need in order to carry on, that life needs in order to carry on and not die out this generation. It's a socially adaptive strategy based on sexual dimorphism, which is based on the fact that we're a sexually reproducing species. Females get pregnant and have babies. Men don't. Cultures have figured out that this makes suggestions about the different roles that men and women play in service to reproduction. So it's not a malevolent, oppressive conspiracy, either against women or men, but neither is it a random arrangement that we ought to just change quickly and on a whim. In the long sweep of time, it's only been recently that we've tampered with this. In the last century, I think we've seen that we've challenged traditional ideas, and most of us would agree that there have been some good things that have come out of that. But I also think that it's been mixed, and I don't know yet, and I don't think any of us know, where it will all go. And we've now entered a time when we don't even agree on what men and women are or what they should do. And sexuality itself is only peripherally about reproduction. In fact, if you want to make it the central reason for sexuality, then you're heteronormative, right? This is a bad thing. You're involved in some kind of oppressive system if you think that what's normal is for men and women to get together and make babies. This is pretty new. And what's also new is that we don't even agree that if you're born a certain way, that you're born a boy, assigned at birth, that you are a boy. You might get to decide you're a woman, and vice versa. So we're entering a lot of uncertainty about how we even understand this very fundamental aspect of maybe not individual survival, but cultural survival. And we don't know where it's going. So yeah, we don't know where it's going, but what we can be certain of is that we don't know where it's going. Well, I hope that I've been able to explain what I think is the root mistake, the fundamental error in thinking at the root of wokism. To reiterate, social groups form in order to provide a survival function to individuals. In order for groups to do that, they have to establish shared norms, shared views, shared beliefs, differentiation of roles, most likely a hierarchical structure, a meta-narrative or a religion or a shared mythology or story that unites people and their understanding and identity. And as these things get expressed, wokism finds them oppressive, particularly in Western societies, and seeks to criticize and dismantle and destroy all of these things. And it does this with a dream, a vision, an offering that a utopian reality can be ushered in when these things are removed. I believe that that's a big mistake. I've also acknowledged that there can be and have been, and there are oppressive social systems that we can address, but that we should do so carefully. We should do so with a recognition of what any social group needs in order to survive and not attack things willy-nilly. I don't think civilization is like something we've just created recently as if on an Etch-a-Sketch, and that if we don't like it, we should just turn the Etch-a-Sketch over and give it a good shake and start again. I think that's a mistake. I think we will damage things that took a very long time in order to emerge, and we won't wind up with something better. We'll wind up broken, and who knows what comes next. I think wokism is treating things as if they're an Etch-a-Sketch that can be flipped over, shaken, and their dream can be sketched in. That's the mistake at the root of wokism. Well, thanks for staying with me to the end. If you're still hearing my voice, I really appreciate that you hung in there. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe to my channel, share the video with a friend or somebody you think would enjoy or appreciate it, and leave me a comment. If you want to elaborate on what I've said, that'd be welcome. If you disagree with me and you think I've got something wrong, please let me know. I'm eager to have a dialogue, and for now, I think that's it, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, take care, be well, bye-bye.